Asking someone why they love to fly is almost like asking someone why they like Picasso. The beauty is the fact that you can't really describe it. It's something you have to behold. Flying takes you into another dimension, literally. As ground-based people, we walk this way, we drive that way. But in the airplane, we go this way. And we add an entire dimension. We see, feel, and experience things that people who don't fly will never know. And yet here at Van Nuys Airport and other airports like it, the price of admission is an interest in aviation. If you like airplanes and you like to fly, you're welcome here. Nothing else counts.
My mother would take me out to the airport and park in a viewing area and watch airplanes.
And as a little kid, just stand with my hands up against that fence, looking out and watching the planes and nagging my mother to let me go up in an airplane.
My mom used to say that when I was a little baby, my dad would be holding me and I'd see an airplane and say, airplane. It's like, you know, we're going to do this now.
I think I started thinking about flying when I was a young child. I used to dream about it all the time.
When I grew up, I had a lot of dreams, like dreams of flying, that I could just fly.
As a little kid, I just always knew that was something I wanted to do, whether I became a bird somehow, and that was just the closest thing to being a bird.
I know I compared with Desiree a little bit. I had a barn out in the back, and I used to jump off the barn with my brother, the same thing she used to do, thinking, oh yeah, you can fly a little bit off the barn.
Soaring with my hands out, building the little crates with the wings on them, trying to imagine myself flying.
Thought, wouldn't it be nice to be up there, all alone in an airplane, doing what I want to do, see what I want to see, and that's what prompted me.
There are some feelings about flying that defy description. Only the best poets in the world can probably do that properly.
Robert Louis Stevenson's verse of poems for children said, how I love to go up in a swing, up in the air so high. It is the loveliest thing that ever a child could do. Up in the air and over the sky, so I could see so wide, rivers and trees and valleys, all over the countryside.
Parents sent me to my grandparents back east, and during this flight I looked out at the wings. I knew they kept the airplane in the air, but they weren't doing anything, they weren't moving, and I couldn't understand how that happened. All this iron around me was being suspended. And when I got to my little hometown in New Jersey, I went to the library and I began reading about aerodynamics and aeronautics, and it seemed so intriguing that I couldn't wait until I got back home and I'd go to the local airport, and my first airplane ride was literally hitchhiking this way instead of that way.
Many people think the local airport, which may be some distance away, is the one in which there's airline service or commuter service. And yet, in this country, there are less than 600 airports with any air carrier service. There are 17,000 landing facilities for general aviation airplanes, helicopters, and seaplanes. I wish I'd been around when they invented these two most misunderstood words. General aviation. What in the world does that mean?
From the jets that you see flying in and out of here to the people that fly for the fire department and the police department to the little airplanes, that's all considered general aviation.
The general aviation airport is where you can park an airplane. You can learn to fly without having to be concerned too much about the scheduled aircraft or the commercial aircraft.
The small general aviation airplane, those powered by piston engines and twirling propellers, is the fundamental basis for all of aviation. It's the bedrock, it's the foundation. Without it, the entire infrastructure of aviation collapses.
We have to have little airplanes to get to the big airplanes. Everybody driving a big airplane started in a little airplane.
Virgin 124, keep it climbing to 4,000 and contact departure now. Good evening.
Up to 4,000, we'll see you, Spirit 124.
But the problem that the United States faces with airports today is that too many of them are closing. And once an airport's closed, that's the end. You can never reopen it because the land is recycled into some other use. Airports are not being replaced. And as we lose them, we're losing centers of commerce, centers of recreation. All kinds of things happen at airports that we suddenly lose.
I know that airports are never popular in a community, particularly in a residential area. They're almost like NASA in that regard. Nobody had any respect for NASA until they got a PR man to tell people what they were doing.
You've got to explain to them what you're all about, why the airplanes make noise, how much money is the airport generating, what's good about the airport. And then when they find out what's really good about the airport, they'll partner with you.
Airport information, Mike 23500 weather, wind 2509, visible 10.
Well, Van Nuys is unique because it's the world's busiest general aviation airport. Controls more traffic, has more activity than any other general aviation airport anywhere in the world. As a matter of fact, is busier than London Heathrow, is busier than any airport Europe can throw at us, or the Orient for that matter.
It is true that we do have one takeoff and landing about every 45 seconds during the day, and we probably have the world's greatest controllers.
At this airport, you can be working 30 airplanes, and it's a huge mix. Everything from Piper Cubs to MD-80s, and you're working them at the same time.
It's a little town, and we have everything that a little town should have. Police department, engineering department.
We're the largest employer in the valley. We hire more people and pay more people on this airport than any other industry in the valley.
When I think about Van Nuys Airport, I think about the historic significance of that airport.
It's famous. 16 right. When you see those numbers and you hear the controller say you're clear to land 16 right, and you know you're home. You're at the greatest airport.
What's incredible about this airport is what's behind the closed doors. You know, what you see when you open the doors.
The Van Nuys Airport is very special because of the diversity of the airplanes here. World War II airplanes, warbirds, privately owned, P-51s and biplanes, Pitts, is just all kinds of different airplanes flying on the weekend.
Most of my job is talking to pilots all the time, and I get to know all the pilots and by name and numbers. They recognize my voice when they come into the area.
And instead of saying Van Nuys Tower, they'll call Phil's name. They hear him on the radio. I love to hear Phil's voice.
I can't remember when Phil wasn't in the tower. The most relaxed guy there can be.
Coming in from Europe and you've been up 14, 16 hours, there's nothing like hearing Phil say welcome back to Van Nuys.
How's everything going?
Going all right, Phil. How you doing?
I got the late shift tonight.
Once you get some years on it, then you can get a day shift.
It's my own personal history that makes the airport special for me, in the sense that it's my home airport. It's where I learned to fly. It's where I had my first airplane. Now I'm addicted. I can't imagine not having an airplane.
Steam 5 Quebec Sierra, runway 16 right, clear for takeoff, wind 2408.
Clear for takeoff, 16 right, 5 Quebec Sierra.
This airport has more corporate jet airplanes on it than any airport in the world. And the people that come to Los Angeles to make the deals, they come to Van Nuys Airport.
This airport is so perfectly set here in the middle of the San Fernando Valley. I mean, we've got Hollywood, we've got Los Angeles, we've got the business districts here are tremendous.
Van Nuys is an international airport. Typically, we'll leave here and go nonstop to Nice, France, Paris, Amsterdam. We can get customs here and immigration here. When we come in from Europe, it's nonstop right to our destination.
25 tank sir, begin your turn and contact departure 12875.
See you later, Phil. Thanks.
One of the most important things we have here at Van Nuys are the students, the people learning to fly. And this airport has provided an arena for people to learn to fly for 75 years.
I was like a little kid when I was learning how to fly. I mean, I would actually go out and sit as close as I could get to 16 right and watch planes come in for hours.
Van Nuys Tower, Premier Port in Papa Charlie.
During the initial time that I started training, someone suggested that I take a handheld radio and go sit at the red line. And I found a place, parked my car, got out, used my radio and listened, and kind of put myself in the place of each of the radio calls so that I could begin to understand what they're talking about, to learn the language. It took on a tremendously special meaning, and to this day I'm admitting that I need my red line fixed. Now, that means I just go out and I'll sit there for a half an hour and I'll watch operations. I'll be right at the edge of the runway or the taxiway, as far as they'll let a civilian go. And just being there is being a part of the airport.
If someone's going up for their first solo, they usually tell us, because then we can give them a little extra room, we give them a wind check, and I just take care of them a little bit better, not push them, because I did my first solo at Van Nuys Airport as well.
You help square them away, keep them safe, and then you kind of cut them loose, like, all right, you see them solo, and they're always, that was my first solo. And we're always telling them, good job, keep it up. Or maybe give them some numbers, all right, that was a 6, try it again.
All of a sudden, the guy that taught you isn't there anymore.
You don't know when it's going to happen.
They just got out of the airplane and stood there on the ground and looked at you and said, okay, fly.
And he sort of monitors you, but he's sure that you can do it. He's sure that you're ready.
And when I took off, I thought, my God, there's nobody in front there. I'm all alone.
And he said, I'm here. He had his walkie-talkie. I'll be listening to you. You just do what you've been taught to do.
But something comes over you, and it's the realization that it's up to you. Everything that you're about to do is you. So you remember everything you've been taught, you take off, and sure enough, it's the greatest feeling in the world, because when you land, you've just done what so very few people have done. And not for that reason, but because you were able to do it.
And it's an incredible feeling of, look, Ma, no hands.
Then after the license, of course, comes the plane. I was in a position then where I could afford an airplane, and I bought a brand new Bonanza in about 1975. I had my own airplane, my own Bonanza. And the day that I got it, or a couple of days after that, my wife and 2 kids and I were going out to a movie, and I said, no, we got to go by the airport first. And we went to where this airplane was, and I forced them all to get in the plane, to sit down, and I kind of showed them what it was like to fly it. I mean, I was so excited to have this airplane. So my family sat there like, Dad, we got to get to the movie. But, we had to go see the plane first.
I hung on the fence for about 4 or 5 years trying to figure out how I could buy an airplane. It is as it was in 1944 when I come out of the factory. You won't find one in the country that is equipped the way this one is.
Well, the DC-3, I painted it up in 1952 United colors, which is what I flew. We fixed it up really nice.
My family had a history with A-26s. My grandfather bought some A-26s after World War II. He owned A-26s, and my father owned A-26s.
But then my dream always was to have something like what I have now, which is this Citation 10, which is the fastest non-military jet in the world. I save an hour with this plane, coast to coast, both directions.
There was a period where the pitch was down for 6 months for some repair work being done to it. I found myself still coming up to the airport when I didn't have an airplane just to see my friends and to hang out with my friends and talk about airplanes. I'm up here on days where it's rainy, and I'm just working on some things in the hangar with my airplane because I enjoy coming here on the weekends or my Fridays.
It's a place where you just like to hang out because of the size of it, the number of people there, and the different mix of airplanes. They're all there in that spot. And it's been there a long time.
There's nothing like it on the planet. It's not just about an airport, it's about a community. It's about a community of flyers and people that are dedicated to the special art of flying.
I would just go there not knowing what the hell I was going to do. Just to walk around, see who I could meet, hang out.
Paul Moyer, he used to come in a lot to the office and do a lot of hangar flying.
Tell lies about all these different flights that I never took. And
hangar flying, the way I see it, is a bunch of pilots talking about their experiences, and I used to like to ask them if they logged it.
I wrote in my logbook, this is a love story.
please call and my phone number if you find it. It was a cherished log. Every little airplane I flew in those days, things weren't as strict. Somebody would come along and say, could you fly this airplane? Have you flown it? Of course I can. Yes, I have, right? But it went in my logbook.
I log every flight, every time I go up in every airplane. That's my record of what I've done, and I'm very proud of it.
Well, it's part of your life. It tells what you did and when you did it.
My best memories of the Van Nuys Airport were in my early days. Were in the 50s and 60s. It was the best time of my life.
I came here in 1959, January, the same year that the FAA became into existence, and have been here most of my career.
In 1938, when I first went to the Van Nuys Airport, and I just fell in love with the airplanes.
Probably my first real memory of the airport would be 1934.
Aviation was just starting to be popular after the First World War. You know, there were a lot of barnstormers around in little small dirt strips, and I think maybe the thing that really got to me, it got to millions of people, was Lindbergh, 1927. And of course, he became a god, an idol, and everybody wanted to learn to fly then.
I was probably 6 years old. My mother took me down to Los Angeles, and I sat on a curb and watched Charles Lindbergh go by. And he's always been my hero.
I was 10 years old when he made his flight to Paris. I immediately sent for a kit of the Spirit of St. Louis. It flew very badly. It was unstable about all three axes. And I had the pleasure of meeting Lindbergh years later. And I mentioned this model I built of the Spirit of St. Louis and how badly it flew. And he laughed. He said, must have been a good model. The airplane flew that way, too.
Most people focus on aircraft, but the airports are somewhat the unsung hero. Aircraft always need a place to rest or nest, and without the airports being there and understanding how they function, how they grow over time, the whole aviation industry wouldn't really exist.
16 right, clear to land, wind very well. 16 right.
Roger that.
2.5 months ago, this port was just a bean field. But we are not only building a permanent location for an airport, but an airport city with industries, with homes for employees, with stores for their wants, with a hotel.
Los Angeles Metropolitan Airport is being built where the visibility is unlimited by a group of men with unlimited vision. It's designed for present and future permanency of the aircraft industry with 2 smooth all-weather runways and emergency landing fields on all sides. If you are identified with the aircraft industry, you are interested in the Los Angeles Metropolitan Airport.
Well, the idea for a Metropolitan Airport originally, typical Southern California thing called a real estate development. 3 fellows, Heffron, McCrae, and St. John, got together and decided to promote and develop a airport in San Fernando Valley. And the San Fernando Valley then was dry, barren crops, but very, very few people. It was originally conceived to be the best airport in the Los Angeles area. And in its conception, its location, the way they laid out its runways, the size and width of its runways were the best in the West and possibly the best in the whole United States.
What they did is they invested in this planned community. They brought in aircraft manufacturers such as Bach Aircraft Company, which was a major investor in the airport. Just about every realm of aviation was to be addressed here, and they were all supposed to live together and contribute to each other in the advancement of aviation. That's what really was the vision of the founders of Metropolitan Airport.
It opened on October 1st in 1928, but because of the 25th anniversary of the Wright brothers' first flight, 17 December 1928, they decided to make the formal dedication that day. Waldo was the general manager, and he was as well-known a pioneer pilot as there was in the United States. He put that good face upon the airport. Waldo was a thinker and a challenger, and he was a guy that the status quo could always be improved. Of course, he was in an era when the airplane was being improved. Every day there were better and better airplanes and more challenges. Well, Waldo was part of that process, and this is where aviation really began on a modern basis in Southern California.
My first ride in an airplane was at Metropolitan Airport, and I thereafter became quite interested in flying.
We used to get on our bikes and ride out to Van Nuys and Burbank and Glendale and watch the airplanes. It was about 20 miles. That was a pretty long ride, but we were young kids, and we didn't care what we seen as long as we seen some airplanes, and that was about 1928.
To promote the airport, they had a number of events to highlight its availability, its great flying and weather conditions. Early in 1929, the United States Army Air Corps had an endurance flight here. The question mark flew between Metropolitan Airport and San Diego, back and forth over a period of a week, day and night.
Basically, you had a hose and 5-gallon cans of gas that went into the hose and down to the plane. The procedure we use today is really no different, except the hose hooks up to a hookup on the plane, but basically that's the only difference. It took some very, very careful flying, though. Of course, during that particular flight, there was a young woman aviator that decided she was going to get up and establish a record. Her name was Bobby Trout, and when Spots found that she was flying around in his airspace, he told Waldo, "Get her out of there!" And the only way they could communicate was by notes that were attached to the hoses. And Waldo replied, "What do you want me to do, shoot her down?" Of course, Waldo knew most of the woman pilots. He helped run their powder puff derbies and was a factor in virtually everything they tried to do.
Amelia Earhart came to set a new speed record. Metropolitan had a 3-kilometer course spread out from east to west, and she was able to clock a speed of 181 miles per hour to set a new speed record on a closed course. That was followed and broken about a month later by Pancho Barnes, who capped Amelia's speed record. All of that activity was very exciting for the folks in the greater Los Angeles area and attracted a large crowd, got a lot of press. Everybody was very excited about flying in Los Angeles. Unfortunately, all that sort of came to a swift end with the crash of the stock market in 1929. The airfield really went into disrepair. Most of the major investors lost their investment in the airport. The only use of the airport was for illegal contraband. During the Depression, the airport was utilized as a moonshine landing facility for illegal alcohol that was manufactured in Mexico. And the reason they selected it here because there was absolutely no activity.
My family first acquired the airport grounds in 1933 in payment of a bad debt to my great-grandmother. And as a kid, I would be around the airport primarily because this was my dad's vocation. He acted as general manager from about 1933 to about 1941.
Dean Daly Sr. had basically taken the airport and was trying to find a new market or a new avenue to introduce money into the operation of the airport. He did that by allowing the motion picture industry to come in and actually shoot a number of movies.
Perhaps tomorrow we'll be on the plane.
Hollywood sustained the airport and really allowed the airport to revitalize itself and prosper with a whole new generation of folks who were interested in learning how to fly at Metropolitan Airport.
The first time I flew here was with gas models. We used to go out on the runway and just fly at our heart's content. There's no problem at all. We'd see a plane taxiing out or one in the pattern, and we'd just wait until they were finished, and then we'd continue flying. It was great.
My first memories of the airport were of seeing an awful lot of fellows out here learning to fly.
My father and I coming out from Hollywood, and he said, you ought to be thinking about what you're going to be when you grow up. And I said, you know what I'd like to be is an airline pilot. He said, I know a guy with an airplane. Let's go over to the airport. So we went over there, and I had my first lesson that day. I had to sit on that parachute and 2 cushions to see out of the back cockpit. And after flying it for 10 hours, I finally soloed.
What we would do occasionally is go out to a small field about midway between here and Reseda, just a farmer's pasture, and we'd land and load up with rubber boots and shoes and anything we could drop and have bombing practice. And also toilet paper. We'd get up there and let a toilet paper roll stream and see how many times you could cut it with your wings. It was all sorts of fun. And, you know, at that time, there was nothing between here and Reseda, and nobody seemed to care. It was fun.
Well, we used to take off here about 10 minutes to 5, because about 10 after 5, the Lark train would go up these tracks right here, and then we'd see the train coming, and so we'd come along and get down low right on top of the train. When we got over the engineer, you know, it would scare him. You know, here's this big noise right over his head, and, you know, we'd peel off, and that was fun. So I can remember another time we did this, and he was waiting for us. So when we got right over his engine, he pulled a whistle and scared the hell out of us.
The day I soloed was a year after the date I hoped to have soloed. I came out here and went around the patch one time, and the instructor got out and gave me a few words of instruction, and he started to walk away from the plane. He says, "Hey, wait a minute. Somebody's pulled a red flag up on a pole. Something's wrong."
They came out like this, you know. I figured, I wonder what the hell they're waving at. So I made another round or two. They come out. So about the third time, I thought, I better stop. It looks like emergency.
Dean Daly runs out with a red flag and flags all the airplanes down and said, put them in the hangar and leave them there until you hear further from us.
Went in the office, and here's about a half a dozen guys hovering around a little old radio, and right then Roosevelt is addressing Congress on this day of infamy.
So all of the aircraft in Pacific Coast were grounded, no flying.
And the next morning, I went out to the airport, and there was no use opening the hangar because you couldn't get any airplane out, and if you did, you couldn't use it.
The field had closed while I was in the pattern, so obviously I didn't get a chance to solo. That happened a year later in the Navy Cadet program.
After December 7th, 1941, the United States government acquired what was then Metropolitan Airport. That resulted in a name change of the facility to the Van Nuys Army Air Base. The United States Army Air Force invested in the creation of 2 large concrete runways. It really changed the landscape and the permanency of the Van Nuys Airport as we know it today. Around the periphery of the airport, we had aircraft manufacturers that were supporting the war effort with the production of Navy trainers as well as Army gliders. There was a lot of activities directly supporting the war effort.
I'm very fortunate by being a member of the 83rd Squadron and did this flying here. We were over here in August and September of 43. When we first arrived, the first day, I had our squadron commander walk in with a lieutenant. The squadron commander says, "Hey, flight, I want you to meet your commander." He just bailed out of a P-38 over Los Angeles. He caught an engine afire, so he trimmed it up for out to the sea and he bailed out. That was my introduction to Van Nuys, however.
Our nation needed women. We needed women to help because the men were all sent overseas. There weren't any men left to ferry airplanes from the factory to the military schools.
The war was still on. It was 1945, and I was based in Portland, Oregon, and I took a P-38 and flew down to Van Nuys one afternoon. And I was on our initial approach to make my break, and all of a sudden, here comes a Navy fighter. And that guy was all over me. Really, all I wanted to do was get on the ground and go to the latrine. But this guy really gave me a time, and we went at it for probably 5-10 minutes up there, and finally he left me alone, and I went in and landed. Some of the other fellows were there to meet me, and they said, "Gosh, Jim, they were really going after you up there." And I said, "Yeah, who in the earth was doing it?" And they said, "Well, that gal just left here. She was ferrying that airplane for the Navy," and So I don't think that was true. And if it was true, she was a heck of a pilot.
Radio Plane Company in Van Nuys, California, was located in an environment favorable to the procurement of qualified personnel.
In 1942, the Radio Plane Company moved into Metropolitan Airport, and they produced radio-controlled airplanes, basically toy airplanes. The Army and the Navy ended up purchasing these little radio-controlled planes for use in target practice. One interesting aspect of that was Army Air Force photographer David Conover was sent on an assignment to shoot women war workers. His commanding officer was Ronald Reagan, and David Conover went onto the line and he photographed a woman worker, and she was actually very attractive. This was really a defining moment as it transitioned her into a modeling career and ultimately a career as a Hollywood film star who would be known as Marilyn Monroe. When the war ended in 1945, the federal government no longer had an interest in the Van Nuys Army Airfield, and so the airfield really lacked any sort of sponsorship. It sort of meandered and was intermittently closed because it was essentially running out of money to operate. The War Assets Administration sold the airport to the City of Los Angeles for $1. The facility actually changed names as part of the purchase. It became known as the San Fernando Valley Airport, with the only constraint being that Air National Guard operations had to continue through about 1985. The Guard primarily served a reserve function for the regular Army Air Force, and they operated P-51 Mustangs at this time. Civilian operations were coming back to the airport. General aviation was prospering. They had this wonderful facility that had this huge investment by the Army Air Force to take advantage of. That was really the glory days of the airport.
Flying was just for the fun of getting off the ground. So it was pretty cool, a lot of fun.
When I arrived at Van Nuys in 1952, it was busy. There was a lot of student training going on.
The instruction that you got back after World War II was marvelous because these guys are bumming around these airports just trying to make a buck on the weekend. They had a job, but they wanted to fly, and they're probably working for a couple of dollars an hour, but they got a chance to fly airplanes.
I got my license with Roger Clark in the jungle off of Stagg Street in 1951.
Got a job as a line boy at a little place called Valley Pilots across the field.
And after I started having a license, I started flying with Fred Murphy, and he had Cessna 120s and Aero Coupes, and it was pretty cheap back then. You could rent it for about $3.50 an hour.
In the era that I learned how to fly and did my solo, the Van Nuys National Guard had P-51 Mustangs to start with, and then they eventually graduated up into the F-86 jet. And that was the first jet airplane that anybody had ever seen, so I'd be peering through the chain link fence like everybody else, watching these military jets take off. The meeting place for that community was the Sky Trails restaurant.
It was like the gathering place of literally some of the most famous people in aviation.
Of course, all the professional pilots flying for the companies would be over there telling war stories, sitting around the table.
Good old Mr. Tarver would run everybody a tab.
He became a lot of us in the Guards bankers, and we needed money, cash checks, do anything. We could sign the tab.
I understand by the time he did pass away, he had some ridiculous $30,000 in bad checks and what have you.
The story was that one of our friends paid part of his bill, and Mr. Tarver couldn't survive it. It killed him.
I was still at Lockheed at the time, and I just decided I'd like to build what they were called in those days was Goodyear racers.
The Cosmic Winds are very historical Formula One race plane. There was several of them. The aircraft were actually assembled right here at Van Nuys. They were a great little airplane, and they participated at Reno and for that matter, at the Cleveland Air Races for many years.
When Mr. Smith bought the airplanes from Tony Levere and Associates, he came over to me and he asked me if I'd like to fly one of his airplanes for him, and I says, yeah, but I'll have to think about it a little bit, and I'll go home and talk to my wife. And I didn't even get through the gate. I turned around, went back, and says, it's a deal. I was pretty lucky. I flew one of the Cosmic Winds.
Jack Conroy was a fellow guardsman, and he was about 10 years older than me. He was a World War II pilot, got shot down in a B-17 and spent some time in a prison camp. Conroy was the first guy to ever fly from Los Angeles to New York and back. He did it on Armed Forces Day, 1955.
The flight of the Boomerang was unique in that it demonstrated that coast-to-coast jet flight was feasible. Jack Conroy demonstrated that by flying his F-86 from Van Nuys to New York and then returning back to Van Nuys, all within daylight hours. The flight was historic in that it was the first time that anyone had ever accomplished this feat, and it became a predecessor of coast-to-coast airline travel as we know it today.
Back in that era, the only requirement to fly in and out of Van Nuys Airport is you had to have a receiver.
And they didn't work very well. We'd go to the tower. The guys were very good about it. They'd come out, and they'd yell down at us, and we'd yell back up at them, and we'd figure out some way to communicate in a one-way direction.
We only had one frequency, so there's a lot of frequency congestion as well. And so it would get very busy, and usually a controller would stay on position for no more than an hour because of the heavy volume of traffic.
The tower would say, the aircraft downwind, or maybe he'd call you by your type airplane. If you hear the tower, acknowledge by rocking your wings. And the tower would finally say, okay, we got you. Because I would do that all the way around the pattern.
In 1957, the San Fernando Valley Airport received its final name change. It became known as the Van Nuys Airport. Also in that year, the Air National Guard had a need for a larger and faster aircraft, which necessitated a longer runway. The Air National Guard increased the runway at Van Nuys, and in doing so, they created the Sherman Way Tunnel.
I remember the construction going on there, and I remember that tunnel being built, and then when they extended that runway, I guess it's the only tunnel in the whole valley.
It was such a novelty. It was all lit up inside. It's shiny, gleaming tiles in there and all the lights, and you drove down underground and came up the other side. I mean, there was nothing else like it. That was a big deal back then.
It made Van Nuys unique, and it had a runway that was essentially twice as large as the majority of the commercial airports across the country.
It was a whole lot longer than it needed to be for the kind of airplanes I was flying, because it had increased in length from 6,000 feet to 8,000 feet.
It's got darn near the longest runway in Southern California. Sturdy, it was made hard and made right. That made it unique, and its uniqueness collected pilots by the hundreds. The Guard picked up the C-97s, which we flew and flew and flew. They were really with a mother ship.
Weekends and holidays, whenever the Guard would have some event, they would organize great marching bands on the ramp up there at the Guard base. The background was C-97s and great airplanes.
The Air Guard had a motto. They said it's people helping people. The community, other Air Force units, whatever was necessary, those people would do it. On the civilian side were a lot of mercy stuff. The big quake in Alaska, we hauled I don't know how much goods in there for those people, and there have been a lot of other missions around the world, and we had a logo in the front that said the sun never set on any of our aircraft because they went everywhere.
In the early 1960s, NASA had a requirement for a heavy transport to move around the moon rocket or segments of the moon rocket. Jack Conroy developed the Pregnant Guppy for this very reason.
Basically a C-97, and they took the whole top end of it off and put a new superstructure on there that made it look more like the Goodyear blimp than an airplane. It was all predicated on the fact that if they're going to build the missiles on the West Coast and fire them off in Florida, you had to get them there some way.
Most of the bridges in the United States are built to 14 feet 7 inches clearance. So you couldn't put it on a truck and drive it from here to Florida.
Jack Conroy was one of these thinkers that said, we can fly them there.
Some pretty smart people, some engineers and things that were predicting bad things.
And it was probably one of the biggest days around this airport to watch that first test flight. And they took the airplane around the pattern and landed it for a press conference. And Jack Conroy, who was always up, first words he says to the press corps, well, this is nothing yet. Will you see us build a really big one, he says, which they ultimately did.
Werner von Braun gave Jack a letter in 1969 that said he felt that the Guppy was the single most important thing for putting a man on the moon that decade. Back in 1965, I exposed literally hundreds of people to their first ride in a corporate jet. That was very fun days.
I can remember back in the 60s when I first came here, you came out on Saturday and saw a Learjet. Wow, that was something, you know. If you saw a Gulfstream 1, wow, that was something. That was an old turboprop airplane.
In fact, this Learjet, I keep pointing this little Learjet behind us here. That little Learjet has a lot of history. It was the first corporate jet to land at Van Nuys Airport. I brought it here in November 1964. Jack Conroy and I set a record to New York and back in June of '65. People that flew out of this airport in the Learjet that I'm familiar with were people like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis. And I have a guest log that fact, everybody in Hollywood flew in that airplane in 1965.
In 1970, the Air National Guard transitioned to the C-130. The C-130 was a much more modern aircraft that would allow them to have a much larger reach in supporting our troops overseas or within the United States.
Once we transferred over, we had people making non-stop flights from Japan to the United States, when before that was a 3-day trip. So things moved rather fast, and our people moved right along with it.
In the early to mid-'70s, when I first became aware of Van Nuys and moved to Southern California, this was the heyday of aviation throughout the country. Small planes being built almost as frequently as some of the models of cars that you could buy. And it was populated by many, many flight schools and a host of the normal kind of general aviation airplane, a single engine, fixed gear, 4-place airplanes. And the propeller airplane and the piston engine were just a part of Van Nuys, as they were for most general aviation airports in that era.
This airport grew, though, steadily, every year, bigger and bigger and better. And today, it's really an amazing place to visit. It's like a dream come true for the people that originally put it together. It's actually answering everything that they said it would do.
But we are not only building a permanent location for our airport, but an airport city with industries, with homes for employees, with stores for their walks, with a hotel.
The one problem that aviation enthusiasts have is they talk to themselves about how wonderful aviation is, how wonderful airports are, how valuable they are to the community. The problem is they don't talk to the neighbors, and the neighbors don't comprehend and understand what a wonderful resource a local airport is, how much it contributes to the economy. Thousands, millions of dollars, hundreds and thousands of people being employed as a result. The airport is a center for not only interstate commerce, as it used to be, but global commerce. Flights are taking off from Van Nuys going to all four corners of the world. We benefit by that.
Almost every airport I've flown into, you can see petitions of nearby residents wanting to ban certain aircraft or close the airport down. If you want further information to defend the airport, you can fill out the petition with your name and email and things like that. So several airports are experiencing this problem.
People that live in airport community areas, they all have the same problems all the way across the country. What they are concerned about, they are watching Van Nuys Airport for, because we have it all. And as they watch us develop, they learn. And as they learn, hopefully we can keep these airports from closing all the way across the country.
Our members tell us what the most important issue in general aviation is, and that's the concern for preserving our infrastructure of GA airports. We lose about one private airport every single week in this country. Reasons for losing these airports, the land values as the urban sprawl begins to happen as it has so dramatically in the Los Angeles basin. The land that these airports are on begins to be worth more, used for homes, used for shopping centers, etc.
Grand Central in Glendale, all that's left today is the terminal. And the street says Airway Drive or something like that. The terminal is still there and still, it's being used as a warehouse or something today. But you can go back and look and see all the airports that have closed that used to be here.
50% of the airports are gone now. It was kind of fun to go to these different places.
I'll bet that there was 15 airports in San Fernando Valley when I was a little kid. Now there's only 2 or 3 left.
In my lifetime, I've seen 3 local airports just disappear, and they're never going to come back. And Van Nuys is one of those airports that someday, if the politicians get their way with it, it'll be a shopping mall or a housing project or an industrial park.
People, by and large, do not realize that it is not a renewable resource. You can't lose it and then bring it back again.
For more than 25 years, mayors have wanted to close Chicago's Meigs Field for various reasons. The latest one, Mayor Daley, for wanting to put in a park named after his wife. In the spirit of cooperation, our organization said, let's rename the airport after your wife and leave it an airport and put in a park-like setting there too, because it was such a valuable airport for people who wanted to do commerce in the Loop area of Chicago. In the middle of the night on March 30th, 2003, bulldozers were sent in by the mayor, and a dramatic thing that we've never seen before. Instead of painting X's on a runway to indicate that a runway is closed, that's the official market, the bulldozers actually dug trenches 2 feet deep in the cement so the airport could not be used again. The airport that had struggled to be the little airport that could for almost 25 years now was closed forever.
Most of us were kind of shocked that somebody could just go in there, dig up the field, and nobody did anything about it, and now the airport's gone. It's scary because what it says is somebody can go anywhere and do that, and that's that.
And there was no warning, no nothing. Guys go out the next morning to go flying and the runway's plowed.
The airport's gone, it's done, it's over. So when people do things like they did at Meigs Field, everybody goes, how did they get away with it? How come nobody did anything about it? Isn't there anybody there protecting it?
It shouldn't have happened. It just shouldn't have happened. And that airport was sacrificed for the wrong reasons.
It's another reason, though, why I think that we need to be constantly vigilant and taking care of Van Nuys.
We've lost many, many of our airports, particularly in California, which has a richness of pilots and airports. It's the #1 state for both. We lose a private airport, we lose access. And it would be like closing the off-ramps on an interstate highway. Here was a network of runways throughout the country that began to dwindle in number.
It's a shame because we've been losing airports through the years to real estate developments, and it seems like there are no new ones being built. Every time we lose an older one, it hacks away at our airport system.
Van Nuys, Airport Information, November, now current wind 230 at 9, altimeter 2979er.
When people built houses around Van Nuys Airport, and the majority of traffic were propeller-driven airplanes, it was a totally different noise factor than there is now with a jet taking off from the airport.
When the runway ended at the tunnel, the National Guard was flying the F-86 Sabre jet, and they would take off in flights of 3 or 4. And talk about noise. They were noisy, and yet most people didn't complain about it. Later, the real estate people came in and sold property south of the airport and north of the airport, and then eventually, which happens in a lot of cases, the airport became an obstacle. In other words, the homeowners were complaining about the noise.
They're loud. You know, they go and they try to get up and they cut across, and you have to stop your phone conversation or listening to someone if they're right at your patio in the back or something. So you shut your mouth for a few minutes and wait till they go by.
We do have the community around the airport that
That's what I meant, but it didn't used to be that way. It used to be. Now there goes one now.
Sounds like an airplane.
It does.
And it should.
Noise is a huge issue around so many airports. and especially in California where the towns are just growing and growing, and the traffic around the airport and at the airport has just increased. So on both sides, the population is growing, so are the airports.
Sure, the valley was very nice before all the influx of people, and they came here because of aerospace and all the jobs available here. There's no way you're going to stop a city from growing.
Several of us do get noise complaints over certain areas. Many times, though, they don't know the circumstances for that flight.
We do mercy flights. Toys for Tots. We have the flying physicians that fly out of here.
Angels Flight, where we're moving cancer patients from one city to another for treatment. Flying Children in the Young Eagles program, where these kids are learning about aviation and having an opportunity to really see what goes on from the front seat of an airplane and thinking about careers in aviation.
This airport, as do many others, bring a lot of revenue to the surrounding city, and a lot of the aircraft do a lot of good.
There's a lot of people that are alive today and their houses are intact because of what we've done with the helicopters and the airborne aspects of firefighting and public safety. Fires don't seem to have any logic. They don't break out during 8 to 5 hours. And pretty much at night, we have a good possibility of locating the fire early on, getting an initial attack started, so we keep a 1-acre fire from becoming a 50,000-acre fire and causing death and destruction and loss of homes.
When I had my little house, I was one of the complainers because they had a traffic pattern with helicopters right over my house, and I was working 2 jobs and nights and stuff like that, so I complained, and they fixed it, and everybody's always tried to do that, make it work.
We change our approach and departure routes for the helicopters so we don't continually fly over the same neighborhood, and we try to fly as high as possible within the realm of safety to not be a nuisance to the surrounding residents of Van Nuys.
And the industry itself is correcting it. Engines are being built quieter, airplanes are being built to conform with environmental controls better. The things that a lot of people have complained about, the coming of the jet airplane to Van Nuys Airport, are going to disappear with modern technology and new manufacturing.
Van Nuys Airport, information Victor 0200, Zulu weather.
Aviation has evolved in a short 100 years from small kites and a 12-second flight to a round-the-world flight to spacecraft. No, we're not going to stop the future of aviation. But at the same time, if they're taking away all these airports, how is this other reality and technology going to happen? It's important for us to safeguard the general aviation airports, like Van Nuys Airport, like Meigs Field. Above all else, the future of aviation requires airports like this. We can't handle all the types of activity that we want in our aviation future at airports like Los Angeles International. It just can't happen.
Cab 478, runway 16 right, from Sundal, cleared for takeoff.
The United States is defined by its industrialization, and the crown jewel of the industrial age is aviation. It's a complex adventure that you take into not only engineering aircraft, providing facilities for aircrafts in the form of airports, and being able to take part in the adventure of flying. Those airports really serve as a monument to us achieving this realm of industrialization. There's a lot of history in us being able to achieve this, but it would be nice if we were able to preserve airports and their history and their significance and impacts that it's made to our day-to-day society.
If somebody had told me the day I went to work for United Airlines, before you retire, you will be flying an airplane that'll hold almost 300 people. You'll go 600 miles an hour through the sky. You'll be 6 miles up. You won't have any propellers. I'd say put that guy in a straitjacket. But that's exactly what happened.
I think it's a vital part of our community. I really do. I see kids that go to that viewing area and they just sit there and they watch airplanes, and that to them is a dream. And it all starts in a gasoline-driven aircraft. You got to start somewhere, and to somehow think that that isn't going to continue would be a very, very sad day, because so many dreams begin and end with the promise of flight.
When I was growing up, I had already soloed before my parents even knew I was flying. They wouldn't even let me drive the car. So I'd ride a bicycle out there. But it was accessible. I could get right up on the airport and ride that bicycle right up to the hangar. There were a whole bunch of us, but we all wanted to fly, and we did.
I kind of wish I could subtract about 40 of my years, and I'd be out there just having a ball. I'll guarantee you that. I've done a little buzzing around here, but they can't prove it anymore. But yes, you learn to fly, and you fly the way you feel. There's nothing like single engine, single seat flying. When you got the power, you can get in and around those white things up there. And man, it is just out of this world. They call them clouds.